The latest project is fitting a Yamaha R6 shock absorber with various adjustments. On the other side as well for rebound into an FZR250. Now the length is pretty much right and everything else just bolts up, like it's got the correct fitting on each end, so that's all good. The spring, actually I've got two shocks, got another one too. The spring, however, although people do use them, in my opinion are far too heavy. Certainly far too heavy for the FZR250 chassis with the MB100 engine in it, which is significantly lighter on the back than a standard FZR250. Now, so I have removed the springs, which required purchasing and then modifying severely a spring compressor, and then I've got these springs. I've got a couple like this. So this one is actually these we got out of a rubbish bin. So according to this number, there's 62 millimeters inside diameter, 220 millimeters long, and this one is a 7 kilogram per millimeter compression spring. Now these are I've measured the red one, which is the same as this, and then they're 9 kilograms per millimeter compression. So like I said, quite a bit too strong. I'm pretty sure the stock FZR is something like 8. These also have 10 millimeter compression as a minimum when they're installed. So I wanted to try this 7 kilogram per millimeter spring, but it's 220 millimeters long. Now the standard spring, this spring, is quite a bit shorter, as you can see. So came up with this jig, and I've been heating, there's 2 of these springs, I've been heating them up and squashing it down and trying different things. Anyway, I finally cut it to length, and then went through the process of compressing the end down a bit today. And as you can see, it doesn't look too bad. It's not too bad. So all I've got to do now is figure a way of actually grinding a flat on the top surface, the same as these. So what I've done also is I've cut it so once it's all ground, it's going to be a little bit lower, probably 152 to 150 millimeter total length, versus this, which is 165 but installed only 155. And that should go on the shock using this adapter, which I've machined up, because I can't get this out without dismantling the shock, which I didn't want to do. And this new fitting that goes on the bottom here. So the new spring is quite a bit larger diameter inside. It'll still fit OD inside the gap in the swing arm, so it's all good. I just need to get it on the shock. So this has the same installed height for the spring as the original one, but this has added 3 millimeters to the preload. So this, although it looks a bit short, this spring, it'll actually be okay, hopefully. I'm not quite sure what's going to happen to these coils, which I've already heated up quite a bit, and then compressed it down in a number of places around here till I got more or less the end result that I wanted. I probably should have compressed it a bit at this end first, so that once I'd done the rest, it was actually touching the coil. But I'm going to compress this first. I'm going to jack it up so I can compress it in the lathe, and then use a grinder to create a flat spot. Let's see how it goes. Okay, so the problem I'm having at the moment is deciding how to hold the spring while I machine it, while I take the while I create the flat surface for it to sit on. Now, what I'm tending towards is I've got this steel tube here which I've squared off both ends, and unfortunately it's just a little bit smaller diameter, hence the cardboard packing I'll put around the outside. But with this base, which I've got a little pocket for this tube to sit down into, it leaves the spring above this flat surface from this point right around to here, which is about how the other springs are. You know, there's a little gap between the end of the spring and where the flat surface begins. So what I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with a method to hold this spring in this position relative to this tube, and then just take the angle grinder to it. Now, it's not ideal, but looking at the other springs, there is some, as you can see, it doesn't rub all the way around. There's certain hard spots where it's been pressing and rubbing harder, like this one here. So it's quite obvious. So I think having this more or less flat, what I'll be able to do, it'll be good enough to try. And if I've painted it, it'll rub spots off just like the spring has, which means that's basically a high spot. So I could take, if I need to, if I decide it's worth it, a whisker off that point, which will bring the rest of the spring down into contact with the base as well. So cereal packets, bits of cereal packet wedged in there. It might work, certainly worth a try. I'll probably just put a bunch of hose clips around here just to hold it all in place, and then just chuck it in the vise and get into it with a grinder. See how it goes. After a couple of hours of ripping into it with the grinder, that one and this one, and then filing, and then filing with a bit of emery tape over the file, it's come out pretty good. I did end up clamping the spring onto the tube using hose clips. Seems to have held it pretty good. So yeah, it's not too bad. It's just a matter of seeing how it fits in the shock now. I'm pretty happy with how that came out, although it took quite some time despite ripping into it with the power tools initially. What I didn't want to do was leave garks or marks in the surface, because there'll be a stress razor where, you know, it could cracks could start from any marks. So I wanted to make sure it was a reasonably good finish. Anyway, time to see how it fits to the shock. I've just put in a couple of photos of the finished spring. Yeah, you can see the end has been cut. It's worked out really well, just like I expected. And I was aiming for a 152mm finished free length. So this has worked out really well. Alright, I've finished all the metal work on the spring, and I've gone ahead and fitted it to the shock. As you can see, it hasn't come out too bad. I've got the preload set on minimum, and it's got probably 1mm of preload on the spring, so you can still turn it. It's a snug fit, but it can be turned on the shock. So obviously there's no preload. You couldn't possibly turn this original spring with it on the shock. Even at minimum preload, it was 10mm, so there's 90 kilos pressed on it. This has probably got 4 or 5 kilos, which is what I wanted. I wanted very little preload. Now the thing is, I can adjust the preload. This is on minimum, so it can be wound up And if it comes down to it, I can either make a new adapter at this end or make a whole new one of these, and actually have the spring preloaded a little bit more. So yeah, just checking the fit, not too bad. Obviously it needs to be cleaned up and some Olin's yellow paint obtained and have this painted. I may just end up making it matte black, but if I can find some flash yellow paint, this will look pretty good. It'll look very Olin's like. Yeah, no, very happy with that. So it'll be disappointing as hell if it's just a total dog's dinner when it's on the bike, but you don't know till you try it, and I reckon it'll work. But as I've previously said, I know nothing about suspension, not really. Anyway, on and on. So I've fitted the shock with the new spring into the bike. Fits in fine. I've got to make a couple of spaces up each side for the top mount. The shock is slightly shorter, which means the bike sits slightly lower, which can be corrected by a little bit shorter dog bones. Now I've already got a pair of slightly shorter dog bones, 2mm shorter than stock, so I'll be fitting those to test it, although I suspect probably I'll need another 2mm shorter dog bones, but just bouncing up and down on it, it seems pretty good. A bit more compliance than the original shock, which I think was an FZR, maybe a 400 shock, but it had an FZR250 spring on it. This is definitely better. Well, just bouncing up and down on it in the garage, it seems better. Anyway, quite successful in my opinion.